Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. I'm going to try again to use the Backstreet Boys microphone. We'll see how it goes. Is it coming through okay? Okay. I want to first thank our visitors we have here and also our online visitors. This seems to be, hopefully, the first sermon that we're going to have online for everyone to hear. So that's exciting. And most of you have probably gotten a chance to read our message or our quote for the day. Before I read it, who understands it? Roy, you want to give a crack at it? Okay. Very good. So that's what I want you to look at. When we look at this, we see this is Blaise Pascal. And first of all, Blaise Pascal lived from 1623 to 1662. This guy was a French mathematician. He was a physicist, an inventor, a writer, and a Christian philosopher. So he's got quite the resume. But here's what I want you to do. When you're looking at this, first it says, reason's last step is the recognition that there are an infinite number of things that are beyond it. So what I want you to do is look at this and substitute reasons for faith, because faith is our reason for life, right? So faith is the last step in the recognition that there are an infinite number of things that are beyond it. Faith never stops. So what's the last step? There is no last step, right? We're just going to continue on from here. So this is what I want you to keep in mind. It's kind of exciting, like to know that the road never ends, that you'll never run into a dead end. When I do it in my car, it's kind of frustrating. I don't know about you guys, but so anyway, very good. So we're talking about faith. Now, as we talked about in the children's moment, when people read this passage, the first thing you think of is we're supposed to give thanks. Obviously, that's the message, right? How else can we interpret that any other way? I'm going to give you 3. So we're going to start that. So, it's important to give thanks for things that happen to us. And it shows how happy we are for it in the first place. Now, we have a lot of married couples in the church. So, have you ever run into a situation where, husbands, your wife has got you something, a surprise, and she gives it to you, and you're so happy that you're just looking at it, and you forget to say those words. And there's a dead silence. And then suddenly, you hear, you're welcome. Oh, okay. Hitting home. What are you supposed to do about that, guys? I meant to say thank you. And then you get, well, now that I had to ask for it, I don't want to hear it. Does it happen? Okay. Very good. So, we'll keep that in mind. It's always good to laugh in ministry, right? Exactly. Okay. So, we've been talking about Luke. I told you, he must be the guy I go to, because I've talked about him most about anybody. They're on their way home. After this whole journey that we talked about, they're finally going home to Jerusalem. That's the first verse we see. So, this story is not about the saving or healing of 10, but it's more about the saving of 1. And so I broke this into 3 different parts. So the first part is the leper becomes a model of faith. Now, why is that important? Anybody? Okay. So what they say, and by the way, before I keep going, I know I'm going to get off track now, but I'm not feeling well. So after the service is over, Kenny has volunteered to greet you guys as you leave, because I don't want to give it to any of you guys. So if I start coughing, that's why. But anyway, the narrative says that he's not well bred, and he's of mixed breed. Now what exactly does that mean? Of the lepers, he's impure. Okay, and it's irony that this whole message, the obvious point is thank you. Yeah. But what we want to do is look at the part that comes to when he says go to the priest and tend to what is prescribed by the law. I didn't know what this means. I don't know if you guys know what it means. Do you know what it means to be healed as a leper in the Bible? No? I'm going to tell you. In Leviticus, we see chapter 14. This is the rule God gave to Moses for people to be healed. So this is what they had to do. It says, the Lord said to Moses, "These are the regulations for any diseased person at the time of their ceremonial cleansing. When they are brought to the priest is to go outside of the camp and examine them. If they have been healed of their defiling disease," as we see that the people who were healed went back, that's what they were supposed to do, "the priest shall order that 2 live clean birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop be brought for the person to be cleansed. Then the priest shall order that one of the birds be killed over fresh water in a clay pot. He is then to take a live bird and dip it, together with the cedar wood and the scarlet yarn and the hyssop, into the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the one to be cleansed of the defiling disease, and then pronounce them clean." It's in our Bible. That's quite the ceremony, isn't it? And so when Jesus tells them to go to the priest, this is what he's telling them to go do. This is the ceremony that all these guys have to go through, which is bizarre, I thought. So I thought I'd share it with you guys. Now you know. So he stops to give thanks. The one guy stops to give thanks out of the 10. And at first, we talked about, it was either last week or the week before, we talked about looking at it from the other side of where somebody helps somebody, and the guy said, if God is doing this to this person, is it our job to interfere with what God's doing by helping them? And I know that's not the right way everybody thinks about it, but that's just the opposite way. So what I want you to think about what this is going on. So Jesus says, go to the priest and do the ceremony. That's what Jesus says. Instead, he doesn't listen to him, and he gives thanks to Jesus instead. Now, it doesn't say in the Bible that after that, he goes to the priest anyway, and we're going to talk about that later. But he didn't listen to him. And it turned out, because he didn't listen to him, he was the only one to get commended by Jesus. So, we have more conflicting thoughts now. His gratitude for Jesus is the model of faith now. So we go and look at these people who are Samaritans, and we'll talk about that later too. But we see that the one person of mixed breed in this group of leprosy is the only one that comes to thank Jesus, and he is now the model that we're looking at. We're not really looking at the other 9. So he is able to see past the healing of his own body to look at the body of faith that has been healed within him as well. So the second thing we look at is the surprise turn that the passage makes. We're going to look at verse 16. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. That last part of the sentence is in there for a reason. Now, why is the Samaritan part important? Exactly. So we have to put ourselves in this position of what impact this was to the people back then. We're looking at it like, oh, he's a Samaritan, big deal. But that's exactly right. It was a shock that you would allow this to happen. This person who was the model of everything that we're supposed to be on life on earth, and the one person doing good is the person we don't like. So back then, that hit them pretty hard. And so it undermined the stereotypes about Samaritans too, which kind of, it didn't get rid of the tension between the two classes, but it certainly addressed it and may have brought them closer in the process, right? So, another part we're going to address is verse 18. If you don't believe me, no one has returned to give praise to God except this foreigner. Who said that? Jesus. Jesus called him this foreigner. Why in the world would Jesus, the person who's always talking about equality in man and all men are created equal under God, is now segregating this one guy and calling him a foreigner? In God's eyes, there is no foreigner, right? So why would he say that? Kind of a big deal. Another thing we just skimmed over, right? So we're going to talk about it. Jesus is the one that calls him the foreigner. The reason we have all these parables in the Bible is because we can compare them to something in our own life, right? And obviously things are still comparable today because we're still talking about them, right? So we can pretty much count because we know Jesus and we know why he says the things that he says, for the most part, that he said this as a point of reference. This was just to reinforce the fact that he was a Samaritan, and people who we tend to stay away from in our own life, we can apply that person in this situation. So that's where we get that from. The third part is the indictment of the other 9. So there's 3 questions, and the first one was addressed in 18. Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Jesus asked all 3 of these questions. The other 2 were not all 10 cleansed? And where are the other 9? So, what can we take from that? The other 9. Now we're talking about the other 9. Anybody think about the other 9 once the story goes out? Or do we only we see the one guy giving thanks and we're like, okay, we're supposed to thank God. Is that we're supposed to cut it out? Story goes on. All right, here we go. So, we're aware that at this point, we see people maybe in our own lives who have been affected by the Lord, who have been cleansed by the Lord, who have been helped by the Lord. And even though these life-changing events happen that turn their, how they perceive things around, they still can't find them. They still fall out. These guys had leprosy, and most of the time when you had this, I mean, that was game over after that, right? So for them to be healed of this and then to ignore the one person who just helped you, I mean, that's kind of a slap in the face, right? And you could see why Jesus was upset about this. And do these people have excuses for not doing that now? Because we talked about the fact that they listened to Jesus. He told them to go, and they went. That was the right thing to do, right? Or wasn't it? Are we confused yet? A little bit? I'm not making any of this up. This is all what we just read. They listened to him. They turned around and left. And the one person who didn't listen to him is the person who's most important in the story. So the other 9, we see, what are the problems we see in nowadays? We get, all these bad things have happened to me over a long period of time. And now because something good, it was a comeuppance. It was time for something right to go, right? We don't give thanks to God. Sometimes we forget. And you have other people who are like, I'm too busy. Too busy to thank God. I don't know if I said this during the service, but I just had a meeting with the district superintendent, Beth Jones. And she was talking about how my communication with God goes. And what I summed up after a long conversation was the fact that prayers don't have to be all the time these in-depth conversations that we have to isolate ourselves or be with a group of people in order to talk to God. A lot of times when I'm talking to God, I'm just driving or something like that, and they're just mental, they're prayer text messages is how I put it. Really short snippets. He's always there. He's always listening. And they don't have to be long. You don't have to address them like a letter, "Dear God, sincerely me." It's not how it always works. And who uses letters anymore anyway? I don't know if the post office still have mailboxes, for Pete's sake. But anyway, so we're talking about the short things, the short thank yous. Now, obviously, the thank you part is the part that we've always learned. And I've given you 3 other ways to look at this that you can take home with you. An outsider or a person who's segregated, he shows the spontaneous part of faith that we see. And it enlightens us, and it kind of builds our spirit in a way that we want to give thanks at this point because somebody, and we're not saying that we feel like he's below us, but at least in the story we can see that he's less worthy in the times back then. There is a theory about why he stayed too. So we already talked about what the Samaritan meant. In the leper colonies, you may not know, the segregation between Jew and Gentile and Samaritan didn't exist. They were just lepers. There was no higher leprosy camp and a low leprosy camp. They were this group of people confined into one space. And now you have 3 different parts of people's worldviews, and they're now one group. So they're all equal because of this disease, which is kind of interesting to think about. But because that didn't exist, and because he didn't practice Judaism, the part about going to the priest wouldn't have applied to him, right? So we look at this like, oh, he's the one who gave thanks, so he's the only one who did something right, correct? But in the grand scheme of things, if he wasn't a Jew, he wouldn't have gone back to be healed by these priests because he didn't have any part of it. So he did what he knew, which was to thank the person who did something nice for him. Right? Something different. So giving thanks was basically all he had at that point. Is that all that he had? If you don't have God in your life at this point, and I hope all of you do, but if you can put yourself in that situation, is that it? Can you just thank the person that's here on earth and you're done? What's the job? What's your job at that point to that person? We talked about discipleship almost every Sunday since I started. Come on, somebody say it. What's our job? Speak. We're the megaphone, the microphone. Our job is to let people know. And like I said, we don't need to be overbearing. Our thanks, our way of giving thanks to the Lord of what he's done for us is to spread the word, right? That's our job as disciples, correct? So that's what I want you to do. I want you, as we go forward this week, is maybe to thank him for the little things that we may not thank him for. It's easy to see for the big things. We lose our wallet and we think it's gone because it just happened to me. And I probably thanked him 50 times for that, but because I was having a heart attack. But the little things that we makes us smile at the moment, we could just give him thanks for real quick. He's always there. He's always listening. And also, if we see another person struggling, or they say something, I'm going to put Ruthie on the spot here. She was talking about somebody in her life that was saying some vulgar things, and she didn't want that to be present. So, Ruthie, wouldn't that person need some help? Yes, exactly. They lost their way somewhere, and we don't know what it is, or we don't know what kind of help they need. But is that our job? It is a little bit, but we give that job to God. And he's the one who's steered us right so far. We're not going to deny him that opportunity further, are we? So let us do that. We're not to, also, we talked about this a little bit before, to shout from the street corner. I mean, we're told not to do that. Instead, because you can't convert people that way. We're not talking about just from religion to religion, denomination to denomination. We're not talking about that. We're talking about letting people find God. And we can't force them to do that. They are going to want to do that themselves, and God's going to have to speak to them. That's how that works. So we're just going to give little introductions and help them along their way and let God find them because they're lost. Amen?